everyone, it's Amanda Pratt, a licensed clinical social worker with Imagine Life Therapy, and we are doing another Facebook Live Friday. And last week we were here and we talked about the number one thing that my clients say is the hardest thing about living with a chronic illness. Today we're going to answer a question. So this question came up in one of the chronic illness groups that I am a member of, and at first I thought there was a very obvious answer to the question, but then the more I thought about it, the more I was thinking, you know, this is actually a very complex question. So the question someone asked in the group was, is fibromyalgia a neurological condition, or is it a mental illness? So for anybody out there who doesn't know what fibromyalgia is a chronic condition that is characterized by chronic widespread pain, and they consider the pain to be musculoskeletal. I can never say that word. But basically it's pain in your muscles. Your muscles get really tender, and so they also, they say that if you have pain in 3 out of the 4 quadrants of your body for 3 or more months, that is one kind of check mark that they see as a symptom. Another symptom is chronic fatigue. So being really tired and exhausted all the time is another symptom. And then there also is a symptom of cognitive dysfunction. So a lot of times when you have fibromyalgia, you get something like, they call it brain fog or fibro fog, which is basically where you have a really hard time remembering things that you would typically remember. And this isn't like, you know, some people will say, oh, I forget things all the time, but this is kind of more of forgetting things that you should know. So forgetting your zip code, forgetting where you live, things like that. Big things that you don't typically forget. It's not like losing your keys or something, although if you have brain fog, you might not only lose your keys, you might literally not be able to remember where you put anything. You might not be able to remember things you've scheduled for that day. So it's really pervasive. It's not just the typical, oh, I don't remember something. Another thing that comes with brain fog and the cognitive dysfunction is that sometimes you have a hard time making words or thinking of the right words that you want to say. Like it's right here, but you can't get it out. So that's another thing that comes with that. So fibromyalgia has a long history of kind of being a mystery, I guess you could say. And so in the past, it was one of those conditions where people didn't really think there was anything wrong with you. They might think that it was really you just have some kind of mental illness or psychological trauma or something that was underlying, and that the fibromyalgia wasn't actually a real condition. Well, we now know, and there has been a lot of recent research, thankfully, that is actually forcing medical professionals to say, hey, this is a real thing, this is something that we can classify. And so that is kind of a brief description of fibromyalgia. I myself have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, so I know a little bit about it. I'm not a medical professional, so I want to make that clear. I am a mental health professional, so that is where my expertise lies. But I do have more than average knowledge about a lot of these conditions that I experience because I researched them extensively myself and lived them. So that's where my knowledge comes from. But so I want to talk about the difference between a neurological condition and a mental illness. So a mental illness is a dysfunction in your thoughts, feelings, or behaviors. So people who work in the mental health field, we deal a lot with thoughts, feelings, and behaviors and how those are connected and how they affect each other. Fibromyalgia is not considered a mental illness. Anything that would be considered a mental illness would be listed in what we call the DSM, or the Diagnostic Statistic Manual, and that is where all of the mental illnesses are listed. Fibromyalgia is not in there, but a neurological condition on the other side of that is any disorder that is characterized by a pathological problem or dysfunction to the central nervous system, which is your brain and your spinal cord. Now, this is where things get a little muddy. And with fibromyalgia, you have obvious parts of it that are somewhat connected to the central nervous system. There's research that shows that the way people with fibromyalgia process pain is very different than regular people. So typically, if you experience pain, like say you get hit in the leg, you are built, your systems are supposed to put some things in order, so to speak, to dial down that pain so it's not so overwhelming. People with fibromyalgia can't dial down, so they experience a higher level of pain where someone might experience a mild annoyance, so to speak. So it has to do with the way the nerves are processing pain. And as we know, anything that hits your nerves, that message gets sent to your brain, which then puts it into the zone of the central nervous system. So the question of is fibromyalgia a neurological condition or a mental illness, I would say that even though there are a lot of neurologists, people in the field of neurology that don't want to claim fibromyalgia, I think that the more research that comes out is actually pointing in that direction, and it's more supportive of a neurological basis for the dysfunction. I would also say, and like to point out as well though, that there are aspects of mental health that do come with fibromyalgia. So if you were to look up and Google fibromyalgia, there would be a list of symptoms first. These are the symptoms, boom, boom, boom. These are the things that are found medically to be considered signs of fibromyalgia. This is how we might diagnose it, say. Then underneath there might be something like people with fibromyalgia also experience. Whenever you see that, what they're saying is that there are comorbid conditions. A comorbid condition is a condition that often happens with each other. So if two conditions are comorbid, it means that a lot of times if you have this one, you also have this one. So it almost is like saying, if you have this condition, you're probably more likely to have this condition also, because the two just tend to go together. So one of those things is depression. Now, if you've heard me talk about depression or chronic illness at all, I always let people know that depression is the #1 comorbid condition with any chronic illness. So any chronic illness out there, it's probably going to say people who experience this also experience depression, or are very likely to experience depression. And so depression itself is a mental illness. Now, it's not a symptom of that disease that it might be comorbid with, but it might occur with it. And there are a lot of reasons for that. Anytime someone has a chronic illness, it brings a lot of stress. It often means lifestyle changes. It often means that there are unexpected things that happen, whether it's finances, having to do treatment, to changing your ability and the things that you are used to being able to do. And those things all put stress on not only your body, but your mind. And a lot of times that can put us into a funk. And there are people who've never had depression before that experience depression after having a chronic illness. And there are people who might have some experiences of depression, maybe early in their teenage years, and then getting a chronic illness, it really brings that out, and it's much worse also having a chronic condition. So I want people to understand that while fibromyalgia itself is not considered a mental illness, oftentimes people experience mental illness with fibromyalgia, or not long after getting fibromyalgia if they don't have the skills to cope with it, or if the chronic pain in general is really overwhelming to deal with. And as you know, if you have one of these disorders, there isn't a lot out there for people with chronic pain in terms of, and there's a lot of controversy in terms of medical intervention, you know, pain medication versus no pain medication. And so it's a really tough experience to have to go through. But I'm happy to say that there are a lot of things that you can do on both sides, whether you take medications for your pain or whether you prefer to do things like stress reduction. There is a lot out there. It may not seem like it, but yeah, so I think I'm going to end it there. I do want to recognize that this question was a really good question. It had me thinking all week about it, and while it definitely has some pieces that affect your mental illness, and it does have some pieces that affect the nerves and the nervous system, there's definitely a lot more that we're going to learn about it. Hopefully, I'm very confident about that. And so I think the more that we learn, the better we will know. And so hopefully, wherever you are, to the person who asked this question, I hope you're finding relief, and I hope that maybe answered something for you. If not, feel free to message me and we can discuss it further. But thank you. If anyone has any questions, feel free to comment them below. I'll probably still be thinking about this while I'm eating my dinner. But I will see you back next Friday. I don't know what I'm going to talk about yet because I like for it to come to me during the week. So hopefully I'll see you next Friday evening and we'll talk about something else, or I'll answer someone else's question. And feel free to visit my website, imaginelifetherapy.com. I have some blog posts up there about depression and chronic illness, and they may be able to answer some of the other questions that you might have. So I will talk to you all next week, and I hope you have a great weekend.